Mark Hayes had always believed that the Earth was alive. Standing at the jagged entrance of Veryovkina Cave in Abkhazia, Georgia, he felt it breathing. Cold, damp air pushed out of the black mouth like an exhale, carrying with it the scent of limestone and ancient water. Above, the autumn sun lit the cliffs of the Veryovkina Massif. Below, more than 2,200 meters of vertical shafts and twisting passages waited, the deepest cave known to humankind. To most, Veryovkina was a place of nightmares. To Mark, it was irresistible. He wasn't a professional caver. He was a geologist by trade, a man who studied stone for a living. But he had spent years preparing for this moment, climbing cliffs in storm winds, crawling through smaller cave systems across Europe, teaching himself how to survive in places where light could not follow. The journals he'd read about Veryovkina spoke of its danger, its beauty, its endless hunger. It had claimed lives before. Mark wanted to see how close he could come to its heart and return. He checked his harness, carabiners, headlamps with spare batteries, a week's worth of rations, medical kit, his field journal, enough gear to survive, if luck stayed on his side. He had told no one where he was going. It was madness, yes, but solitude was the point. He wanted the cave to test only him. He clipped his descender to the rope, leaned back, and lowered himself into the dark. Within minutes, the sunlit world above was gone. His lamp's beam carved a narrow cone through the gloom, glinting off wet limestone walls. Water dripped steadily, echoing like a heartbeat. The shaft dropped straight down, smooth and vertical, the kind of space that reminded you how small you were. Mark moved slowly, methodically, feet pressed against the wall. Rope fed through the descender in careful rhythm. His breath fogged in the chill. Hours passed. He rappelled into vast chambers where his light dissolved into black nothingness. He crawled through squeezes so tight he had to exhale just to slip his chest through. He traversed ledges where one wrong movement meant a fall into invisible depths. At one point, he switched off his lamp. The darkness was complete, pressing against his eyes like cloth. Even his own breath seemed too loud. He shuddered, flicked the lamp back on, and whispered, "You don't own me." By the third day, he was more than a kilometer underground. He made camp on a narrow shelf, unrolled his tarp, boiled water on his tiny stove, and ate a protein bar. His journal entry that night was simple: Veryovkina isn't just silent, it listens. On the fourth day, the cave struck back. He was navigating a wet shaft, rope taut beneath his hands, when his boots slipped on slick rock. His body swung hard, slamming into an outcrop. The sound of bone breaking is one you never forget. Mark screamed, dangling from the rope. Pain tore through his leg. When he looked down, nausea rose. His left shin was bent at a grotesque angle, white bone pushing against torn fabric. Panic seized him. He was nearly a kilometer underground. Alone. No radio. No team. With desperate effort, he clawed his way onto a ledge. Sweat poured down his face in the freezing air. He tore strips from his shirt, lashed them with rope, and splinted the leg with spare carabiners. It wasn't elegant, but it was something. "This is how people vanish," he muttered. "They break, and the cave swallows them whole." But Mark wasn't ready to vanish. Not yet. Survival became his ritual. He rationed his food, half a protein bar stretched across a day, a sip of water every few hours. His bottles emptied quickly, but he discovered salvation in a fissure where water dripped steadily into a shallow basin. Crawling to it was agony, every movement sending fire through his leg, but without it he would be dead. The infection worried him most. The skin around the wound grew red and hot, swelling until it shone. He swallowed antibiotics, praying they would hold off the rot. His journal turned from scientific notes to confessions. Day 7, food almost gone. Pain constant. Drip is my only hope. Day 10, heard voices. Saw light. Nothing there. Losing it. Day 12, leg worse. Fever coming. Sleep was shallow and haunted. He dreamed of voices calling his name, of footsteps in the passages, of torchlight flickering. Each time, he woke to nothing but the endless drip of water and the sound of his own ragged breathing. By the second week, he was little more than a ghost in a cave. His hands trembled too much to write. His vision blurred. He began to think the cave had already claimed him. And then he heard it, real voices. At first it was faint, just a murmur carried on a draft. He froze, straining his ears. The sound sharpened, human voices echoing off the stone. Mark's heart slammed against his ribs. "Hi," he screamed, his throat tearing. He grabbed a stone and pounded it against the wall in the SOS rhythm. 3 knocks, pause, 3, pause, 3. The sound echoed into the abyss. Silence stretched. Then, 3 knocks came back. Deliberate. Human. Tears blurred his eyes. For the first time in weeks, he wasn't alone. Hours, or maybe days, his sense of time was ruined. 3 lights appeared in the dark. They grew closer, until faces emerged beneath them. Tired, bearded, alive. The leader crouched by Mark, voice deep and steady. "I am Oleg," he said in accented English. "This is Pavel. Elena. We are from Camp 3. Mark nearly sobbed with relief. "You found me." Oleg's eyes flicked to his leg. His expression didn't change. "Bad break," he said simply. "But alive. We fix." They worked with calm efficiency. Elena, the medic, cut away the filthy bandages and resplinted his leg with proper supports. Pavel wrapped him in an emergency blanket. Oleg handed him a flask of hot broth. The salt and heat brought tears to Mark's eyes. Oleg raised his radio, speaking rapidly in Russian. When he finished, he turned back. "Surface knows. Rescue plan begins." But he hesitated. "Weather bad. Flood risk. Rescue will take time." "How long?" Mark croaked. Oleg's voice was steady but grim. "Maybe more. We do not leave you." Mark lay back, overwhelmed. Saved, and yet still trapped in the bowels of the earth. When the storms above eased, they tried to move him. He was strapped into a stretcher, ropes rigged to pulleys. Each jolt was agony, but Oleg's voice guided the ascent. "Hold. Halt. Anchor. Good." Halfway through, the cave turned savage. A low hiss built into a roar. Cold spray lashed their faces. "Flood!" Elena shouted. The shaft exploded with water, a torrent hammering down from above. Rocks rattled loose, clattering like bones. "Side passage!" Oleg barked. The rescuers hauled Mark sideways into a narrow seam just as the flood thundered through, drowning the rope they'd been on seconds earlier. They sealed themselves inside a cramped chamber, water roaring outside. It was small, cold, but dry. They named it Little Chapel. And there they waited. Little Chapel became their prison. The rescuers rationed their food with brutal discipline. They caught water from the drip, enough to keep them alive. They told stories to pass the endless dark hours. Elena checked Mark's leg each day, whispering encouragement as she cleaned the wound. Infection still threatened, but her calm steadied him. The radio crackled with updates from above, new ropes being prepared, bypass routes explored, more storms delaying the attempt. Always the same final word: wait. Mark wrote in his journal again. "They saved me, but the cave is not done. It wants to keep us all." One night, as they lay under the tarp, the chamber trembled. Dust rained from the ceiling. Stones clattered against the rock. Elena's eyes went wide. "That's not water," she whispered. "That's the mountain itself." A collapse. The cave wasn't only trying to drown them. Now it was trying to bury them alive. The collapse began with whispers in the stone. First a tick, then a sigh, then the cave roared like a giant waking from centuries of sleep. Pebbles clattered across their tarp, dust filled the chamber, and the sound of boulders grinding echoed up the shaft. When the noise finally died, the silence that followed was worse. Oleg tested the rope they had been climbing. It hung limp, pinned under a slab the size of a car. Above, new debris sealed the shaft like a cork. "Uproute closed," he said grimly. For Mark, it was like being sentenced all over again. They had been so close to moving upward, and now the cave had erased their path in an instant. Little Chapel became their world. The rescuers worked to make it livable, a tarp door to blunt the spray, a line for socks and gloves, a nook for the stove. Even in the belly of the earth, Humans make rooms. Food was rationed with military precision. Soups divided into thirds. Bread cut into squares so thin it was almost symbolic. Elena guarded the antibiotics like treasure. Each drop of fuel became sacred. The radio was their lifeline. Crackling voices from the surface promised a bypass route through the North Fissure, but it would take time, days, maybe weeks. Every message ended the same way. "Hold on. We are with you." Mark listened, half believing. His body weakened, his beard grew coarse, and his hands shook from hunger. But the rescuers carried him with their steadiness. Pavel hummed Russian folk songs that turned the dripping water into a rhythm. Dima told stories about his daughter's pet rabbit. Elena checked his wound daily, her hands gentle but firm. Oleg, silent as stone, spoke only when necessary, but when he said, "We will not leave you," it was more binding than any oath. Time in Veryovkina was cruel. Minutes felt like hours, hours like days. To keep their sanity, they named days after events instead of numbers. There was the day of the stuck food bag, when a supply drop snagged on a spur and Pavel had to fish it down with a hook made from pitons. The night of the bad seal, when the stove nearly failed and Elena cooed at the flickering flame as if kindness alone could keep it alive. The day of the chocolate, when a supply bag included a single gold-wrapped bar. They cut it into 4 equal pieces and let it melt slowly on their tongues. Mark wept without shame. And the worst, the night of 3 silences, when the radio died for hours and the cave felt like it had swallowed the outside world whole. They sat in the dark, listening only to the drip, waiting for a voice that might never return. When the static finally gave way to words, "We hear you. Hold on," they all laughed, giddy with relief. At last, after nearly a month underground, the bypass team broke through. Lights appeared at the edge of the shaft, and a young caver named Nico wriggled into Little Chapel with a grin too wide for the dark. "We open corridor," he said breathlessly. 2 days to Camp 2. The chamber erupted in joyless joy, the kind born not of celebration but of survival. They packed what little they had left and prepared to move. The bypass was no gift. It was a crawl through stone's teeth. Mark was wrapped in a soft-shell stretcher, hauled inch by inch through cracks so tight he had to exhale every breath to fit. His broken leg scraped, fire lancing through him, but Elena's calm voice kept him steady. Small inhale. Long exhale. Again. They rotated the stretcher diagonally to squeeze him through fissures. At one choke point, he swore he heard his ribs creak. He wanted to scream but saved the air for breathing. After hours of agony, the rift opened into a larger pocket. Camp 2. To Mark, Camp 2 felt like a city. Old caches of rope. Dry socks left behind years earlier. A journal sealed in a bag with a doodle of a bat wearing a helmet. Human traces. Proof that the world still existed. Here they met Maya, a rescuer with forearms like steel cables and eyes sharp with determination. She scanned Mark's leg, nodded once to Elena, and said, "We go slow. You will hate me. Then you will thank me." And she meant it. The climb from Camp 2 was brutal. Traverses across walls that sang with the roar of underground rivers. Chimneys polished smooth, tearing skin from hands. Shafts where the stretcher swayed over black nothingness. Mark learned to measure progress not in meters but in commands. Hull. Told. Anchor. Move. He learned to bless centimeters. At one ledge, Maya pointed upward. "The balcony," she said. "From there, you see light." It took hours to reach it, but when they did, Mark wept. Not because he saw the sun, it was still far above, but because for the first time in months, he saw space open before him. A promise. Camp 1. They reached Camp 1 after 67 days underground. Here, the air felt subtly different, warmer, edged with the faint smell of soil. But the surface wasn't ready. Rains hammered the massif, flooding the upper shafts. For 3 days, they waited, rationing the last of their supplies. The radio's message was constant, "Not yet." Mark's journal, once filled with despair, now brimmed with determination. "I will see the sky. I will drink the rain." At last, the call came, "Go." The final sequence was merciless. The shafts were narrow, polished, slick with centuries of water. The rescuers rigged a pulley system, turning their bodies into machines. Mark rose by centimeters, his stretcher groaning, the ropes creaking under strain. At one choke point, he couldn't fit. Maya crouched close, her face inches from his. "Exhale everything," she ordered. He did. His chest collapsed inward, his lungs screamed, and the stretcher slid through. Above, hands multiplied. Voices shouted. Light, real light, not lamplight, spilled into the shaft. It was gray, faint, filtered, but it was the sky. When they hauled him out of the cave, rain struck his face. He opened his mouth and drank it, laughing, sobbing, choking all at once. The rescuers cheered. Cameras clicked. Someone shouted, "He's out." Mark lay on the muddy ground, staring at the clouds. They were ordinary, imperfect, and they were the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. Recovery was slow. Doctors reset his leg, antibiotics fought the infection, and food tasted like miracles. Reporters asked for the story, but he told it differently than they wanted. They wanted a lone hero. He told them instead about Oleg's steady voice, Elena's hands, Pavel's songs, Maya's commands, and the laughter of a young caver who had brought hope into Little Chapel. Solo is a myth, he told them. No one survives Veryovkina alone. A week after his rescue, a ranger handed him a plastic sleeve. This was found during bypass work, he said. Inside was a rubbing of marks discovered in a side gallery near Little Chapel. Tally scratches in groups of 7, and beside them, the faint outline of a small hand. Some said they were survey marks from old expeditions. Others whispered they were older, much older. Mark stared at the rubbing for a long time. The hand was too small to be his. Too sure to be an accident. If he ever returned to Veryovkina, it would not be for conquest. It would be to answer the question the cave still held. Who else had been down there, leaving their mark for strangers to find centuries later? Mark stood once more at the entrance of Veryovkina Cave. The wind whistled through the Arabica cliffs. Behind him stretched the world, wide, bright, alive. Before him yawned the black hole that had nearly claimed him. He pressed his hand against the limestone wall, whispered softly, "You gave me back." The cave, being a cave, said nothing. But deep inside, water dripped steadily on stone, marking time as it always had. Mark turned his back to the abyss and walked into the sunlight.